Hi guys, got SAAD here. Yet another professor guest today who is facing some blowback because of some positions that he's taken at his university. I have with me Professor Rick Mehta, who is a professor of psychology at Acadia University in Canada in the Maritimes. How you doing, Rick?
Oh, top of the world. How about you?
Good, thank you. I'm glad that we finally got a chance to chat. So some folks might not be familiar with your case. Maybe you could give us a general synopsis of what you're currently facing at your university.
Well, basically, what happened is this semester I lost the courses that I've been teaching for years. So, like with the Introductory Psychology 1, the first half, I've taught it every year since 2006, except for the year I was on sabbatical. Since 2012, I really hit my stride, and last year I got even 2 teaching awards. So now, suddenly, this coming year, they've taken away the large section that I've been teaching for years, and they're giving it to someone who they haven't even hired yet, so we don't even know who's in that position. Yeah, and so their rationale was, when I asked about that, was they wanted to give more options to students. So that was the reason that was given to me at the time. I put in an appeal of my teaching allocations because there was more to it than just that. That got overturned. And then
Excuse me.
shortly after that, I saw a rather interesting article in the Aboriginal People's Television Network. I'll just read this one paragraph. So it was by an article written by Justin Brake. The title of the article is "The Biak Effect," in quotations, semicolon, or sorry, colon, "Fighting Anti-Indigenous Racism and Settler Denialism in Canada." So that was published February 21st, 2018. So I think this paragraph is rather telling. So Scott Roberts, a spokesperson for the university, says Acadia will not be issuing a public statement regarding Mehta's comments or behavior, but is, in quote now, currently providing solutions for students who have raised concerns so they are not forced to take a course from Dr. Mehta. So I'll let viewers decide what they will, make their own inferences based on the spokesperson's statement.
So what were they talking about here? Because I think you've been accused of being, I guess, racist, homophobic, transphobic, anti-indigenous. Maybe we can sort of walk through each of the positions that you may have taken that would have led someone to levy those accusations. So start say with the indigenous one. What
Yeah.
what what position have you taken that would cause someone to take that view regarding your position?
Yeah, well, basically, I think what led to that statement and is what put me in the public spotlight in the first place, which was that I tweeted out to Andrew Scheer that you say you're in favor of free speech, but then you remove Senator Biak from your caucus when all she'd done was post letters on her website. So she hadn't actually even made any statements one way or the other at that point. So it was just that. And so I just said, are you then saying that we're going to treat the Indigenous and anti-Indigenous differently? Because if you're saying that, then that's really bad for race relations. So that was the gist of that sort of expanded what I was trying to say in my tweet. So I tweeted that to Andrew Scheer, and then next thing I know, I'm getting a Twitter mob, and then that's what got reported in the media. I was hoping my earlier efforts when I tweeted out to, let's say, Acadia, and I think it was on New Year's Eve, if you really want to fight racism, just get rid of the decolonization efforts with the hashtag "It's okay to be white." I thought maybe that would have caused the big stir, but instead it was the tweet to Andrew Scheer. So that came out of nowhere, and that's what put me into the public spotlight. And so what I can gather is then that students didn't want to take my course because of a tweet that I made and had nothing to even do with what I even said in the classroom, because I haven't talked about Indigenous issues in my classroom because it's not relevant.
So let me unpack that. What was it that the senator had posted that you're referring to for those of you who for the viewers who may not know what you're referring to?
Okay, well, basically, she's been, I guess, a bit critical of the Truth and Reconciliations Commission in terms of how it was set up and the data they collected and how everything was interpreted. So basically, from that perspective, so that's all I think she's criticized, and just said there were other stories. Let's look at the entire picture, not just the one dominant narrative. And yeah, so for that, yeah, she was first kicked out of the Giant Caucus led to Indigenous issues, so that's what happened first, I think. And but yeah, by Ronna Ambrose when she was opposition minister, and now Andrew Scheer removes her from the Conservative caucus altogether So I just find that, yeah, if the Conservatives are not even, they're trying to pander to this base who'll never vote for them in the first place, and they're not even being true to their own values. So that's what I've been critical of the Conservatives for.
And so is that the sole Indigenous related position that you've taken? It was that tweet that you directed to Andrew Scheer. Is that it? Is that the extent to your anti-Indigenous positions?
Oh well, I don't want to call it anti-Indigenous, but yeah, that's
I mean, no, so-called. I mean,
so-called.
I'm putting it in quotes. I'm not suggesting that that's what it is. Yeah.
For the viewers, though, yeah, no, it's for that and just the decolonization efforts in general. And I even sent an email to one of the the co-chairs of our Presidential Action Council on the decolonization efforts, and I put it campus-wide, just saying I have concerns with how it's being done. When you're basing it on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, our federal government did not even they said that they were going to implement everything that's in the TRC commissions, as well as they're going to implement the UN declarations. And then they went back on the UN declaration. So now we're expecting the university to implement these rules that our federal government is not willing to do so. So I brought up those questions. That document brings up, I think, issues like microaggressions. And so I cited an article by Lilienfeld saying that it's completely untestable in its current state. And then I brought up issues like the acknowledgements that we do. Could that be actually counterproductive to race relations? Because if the Indigenous, I imagine many of them are just reading it as saying, oh, we're proudly on your land, but we have no intention of giving it back. So they're not going to be all that happy. And for the rest of us, I mean, I had nothing to do with what happened in the past. And I personally feel resentful when someone tries to make me feel guilty about something I had nothing to do with. So I just see that whole package and the way it's being done as being completely counterproductive to race relations. And it also, I think, treats all the Indigenous as if they're one homogeneous group. So why couldn't you have one who's an atheist or a Muslim or something like that? So I think it actually really stereotypes them, and they, of all people, should probably be more against the decolonization efforts than even me.
Wow. Okay, so that takes care of you're an anti-Indigenous guy. What about you're a homophobic, transphobic guy? What was the gist behind that one?
I have no idea where the homophobic came from. And the only thing I've said in class was that biology is what saved the gay community, because before that it was thought to be a social construct. And so then you had the conversion therapies that were implemented, and that caused a lot of suicides in the gay community. So if anything, it was science, by recognizing that it's biological. I just said that saved the gay community. And so it might have taken a while till the APA or the DSM recognized it and changed the definition. But ultimately, though, it was science that saved the day. And even though it's slow and incremental, eventually the psychiatrists caught on and they changed their line of reasoning.
Oh, but you made a mistake there, Rick. And warning, you need to be aware of my sarcasm. So don't take everything I say seriously, all right? You stated that homosexuality is innate, but you didn't go far enough, because you had to then state that heterosexuality is socially constructed, you see, which is a beautiful position to take as a sexually reproducing species. Homosexuality is innate and biologically based, but the act of engaging in heterosexual mating is just heterosexism. And for you not having closed the loop, that's what makes you homophobic.
Okay, now I know for the future.
Now you know where to. Okay, so then, so you send out that tweet. We get the general gist. So now, what does the university do at that point? Fine, they challenge, or at least they alter your course allocation, but they also send you a sort of fuzzy, ominous letter, which I've had the displeasure of actually reading. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So basically the gist of it is that I'm being investigated for my conduct in the classroom. So basically they're saying that I violated the harassment and discrimination policy that's so broadly defined that
anything is harassment, anything is okay.
Discrimination. So there's that. And so in terms of their evidence then is emails that I've sent to the campus. It includes that, which have been questioning, the gender equity, the decolonization. So those are only ones I've sent that I know of to the campus, the major ones. So the classroom, where I've directly challenged the dominant narratives, because I thought those were directly relevant to the topics that we cover in the second half of introductory psychology. So that's in the classroom. And then, of course, there's what I've done in my social media. So, of course, Twitter is open to everyone. Within Facebook, I have some posts that I put that are for the general public, and then others that are for Facebook friends. So I'm not sure which combination of those that they'll use, but I stand by every tweet and every post I've made.
Let's break it up a bit. Anything that you state as a private citizen, as you're engaging someone on, say, Twitter, surely one would like to think that you don't suddenly lose your rights of being a citizen with an opinion, with a position, as offensive as it might be. And I'm not suggesting that anything that you've said approaches anything close to being offensive, but are they questioning just the stuff that you say within the context of your job as a professor, hence the emails that are sent on campus, the things that you enunciate in the classroom? Or is the Twitter stuff also within the purview of their Orwellian overreach?
I would argue, I believe that it is the Twitter as well, because it's just saying social media. So that's probably going to be as broadly defined as possible. So I imagine that it would be those as well. And I imagine it would be even the posts that I put to only my Facebook friends, because I know a former student of mine became very irate with me for having dared question the Me Too movement, for having gone too far. And so that same person in the classroom, when I put an argument about that was sort of a critique of third wave feminism from the second wave feminism perspective. So it was a clip by Christina Hoff Sommers and a clip from the Independent Women's Forum, where it was a discussion of Camille Paglia with Christina Hoff Sommers. So after that, when I showed a couple of clips, she basically implied that I was endorsing her rapist. So this is an extension of what was in her social media post. So I suspect that that's the same person based on what I know is the email that I received from my designated head. So the content seems very similar. So that's how I'm making that inference when you see that same theme emerge over and over again with almost the same words, like, he denied the existence of the wage gap in class.
Right. Now, what about the position? And now, of all the stuff that I've heard regarding your case, the only one I could imagine them having a minimal leg to stand on, and I'm not suggesting they do, that's why I want you to address it, is the quote accusation that some of the stuff that you discuss in class, never mind whether it's offensive or not, is not germane or relevant to whatever it is that you are supposed to be teaching, right? So let's suppose you're supposed to be teaching thermodynamics, and you're spending your time discussing the gender equity, gender pay gap. Well, then those things don't seem to match. Is there any validity to that, if you like, pedagogic concern?
Yeah, the argument that I made was the section I was covering was developmental psychology. And so I covered the sort of, I think of the prerequisite stuff everyone should learn about, like Piaget, right, and Kohlberg's moral reasoning. So I covered those sections. And then I said the whole rest of the chapter has stuff that I don't think is really, it's either relevant or out of date. And so I kind of said, well, you guys have gone through the teen years. I'm not going to tell you about the raging hormones. That's a bit insulting at this stage. So I'm not covering that. And then some content I didn't cover. I just said, you wouldn't guess, like, why are they still talking about the traditional life script, given that Planned Parenthood has been around 100 years? We've had the birth control pill for 50. So to kind of say the standard life script is how we still live is probably not worth your time, because it's highly inaccurate. So I'm not covering that. Midlife crisis. I mean, we know that that's an out-of-date concept. It doesn't really apply anymore. Emerging adulthood, I said I refuse to even talk about that, because, at the age of 17, 18, that's when we had people your age going off to the fields of Normandy to fight for our country. So to think that you're somehow still not an adult and that you're still emerging and need to be sheltered, I think that's nonsense. And so I'm speaking out against that, and I refuse to cover that. So I just said, okay, well, what is there to cover? And so I said, well, if we want, from a developmental perspective, if we want to have citizens that are going to be engaged, they're going to be informed, they're going to be able to go out into the world and win people over with the strength of their ideas, what do we need? And I think the natural answer to that would be a good education system. And I think I got nods from the students for that. So I said, okay, good. So if we're going to do that, let's look at the education system from a feminist perspective. And so people thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And so that's when I showed them the clip from Christina Hoff Sommers with the War on Boys from Prager University. So it was about 5 minutes, and how it discriminates against boys. And so the reaction was not at all what I expected. And even afterwards, I showed data, showing the enrollment rates in the U.S. and how it was anticipated to grow in favor of women, and presented all this other evidence, and even went into a brief history of feminism. Here's what it was like in the, around 1914. Then a little bit about the second wave, and kind of gave like the, Mary Tyler Moore, like this really positive kind of image, Charlie's Angels, those kind of shows like Wonder Woman that really got people enthusiastic about feminism and actually wanted them to come on board. And then I brought up just a sentence from Christina Hoff Sommers' book, Who Stole Feminism, because I found it telling. She said, it was easy for me to find sources, funding about the, where women are victims, but trying to find the other side was next to impossible. So I thought that sentence was telling, because it shows that you can look at one side of the equation, but not the excesses. So given this, what has happened? And so then I talked about sort of the rise of third wave feminism, and how you had a social movement now being moved into the classroom. And if you think, well, it's a social movement, if the problem is to a large extent been solved, there's no reason for that to be there in a university system. And so maybe that's why we had the change in the adoption of the intersectionalism approach. So I just kind of put that from a logical perspective. And so if that's what they're teaching students, and they go out into the real world, well, that's going to be scary then if they have a false view of the world and they're going into places like education and government and law. And so then I showed a picture of the talk, I think it was at the University of Guelph. We have a minister saying the future is female. So
I've shared that poster.
Yep. So I didn't see. So it's not like I said they're feminazis or anything like that. If anyone made the inference, they were welcome to. But I just showed the poster neutrally, and then I said, "Well, here's what's happening in the education system." And I gave and I showed. And I said, "You can check for yourself. Here's a link to the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. You can look for yourself where they're changing their curriculum. So instead of talking about physical education in grade 5, they're talking about white privilege. Is this something that we want?" So I just presented it neutrally and asked people to question the sources. But yeah, they were not happy about that.
But was there at all a sort of a valuable, constructive conversation, notwithstanding the fact that certainly one or more people were unhappy with your teaching that day? Did it engender some sort of conversation?
Well, I guess yes and no. So the couple of students did come after me afterwards, and not the morning section, but the afternoon. But their comment was, well, it was interesting that they were feminists, but it would have been nice, though, if they were black, though, instead of white. It's hard for me to accept that, given that they were white. So I found that to be rather telling in terms of the criticism, because these came from white students who were women, and so they weren't even willing to listen to feminists because they weren't the same race as them. And wow. Yeah, so I found that. And so just in terms of another circumstantial evidence then, is that I gave that class on February 9th. On February 8th, there was an email that was sent out by the chair of our women, or coordinator of our Women and Gender Studies Committee, saying there was a statement from COUT, saying that they're all for...
Can you state what COUT is for those who don't know?
Oh, sorry, yeah. The Canadian Association of University Teachers. So it's the large umbrella union for all the unionized professors in Canada. So yeah, thank you for those little things. Yeah.
Sure.
So anyway, yeah. So the gist of it was that we're all for academic freedom and debate or whatnot, but it must not create a climate of fear and hostility, especially when it's done in the name of free speech.
Right.
So yeah. So that email was sent out on the February the 8th, and I'm the only person who's been speaking out quite vocally about free speech on campus, as far as I can tell. If there are others, they've been doing it very quietly.
Silently, yeah. So has anybody privately within Acadia University reached out to you and said, "Hey, Rick, I'm on your side, but I'm too afraid of my shadow to say it publicly"? Has anybody done that, or you haven't received any support, even if privately?
I've received just one or two private messages. So there's one from a unionized faculty member, and I could see he was really troubled. It's like I could see he wanted to speak out, but something was bothering him. So I imagine, if I had to venture a guess, that he probably has the same sexual harassment if he says anything. I imagine it's the same kind of thing that he's probably not allowed to. And he has, children to raise and whatnot. And so I can kind of see then if that's a case where he wants to keep his job. So that's been sort of the one, support. There's a non-unionized person as well, but he doesn't have the same. He doesn't have any of the security by virtue of being non-unionized. So those have probably been the most prominent ones. There was a third person who's unionized, and he said, "I support you, but I'm going up for full professor. So let's just wait until my promotion goes through, and then I can be a little bit more free to speak my mind."
Careerism supersedes principles yet again.
Yeah.
Right. I recently had Nassim Talib on. Do you know who that is?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
very brilliant man.
Yeah. So Nassim was on my show, and his latest book is Skin in the Game, and we were chatting about the fact, and he was stating that he really respects people who obviously walk the walk and talk the talk, who have skin in the game. And of course, within the context of academia and those who stand up and actually fight against this stuff, they're the ones who have skin in the game because they're willing to do it irrespective of whether they're going up for full or they're tenured or they're not tenured or they're worried about this or that. But it amazes me, as you correctly pointed out with this story about the guy who's going up for full professor, that most people are so myopically driven by their own selfish narcissistic pursuits, right? If I speak out, maybe the departmental chair will give me a teaching load allocation that is not consistent with my schedule when I pick up my son from soccer, and therefore screw these larger principles, because I certainly wouldn't want to be teaching on Wednesday afternoon when it would conflict with picking up my son from soccer. And that's one of the things that I find most soul crushing, because it's not just the fact that some folks are spewing the nonsense, the intersectionality and identity politics. It's the fact that those who should be standing guard against this are so profoundly cowardly in their willingness to fight against it, right?
Yeah. And then there's others who say, why don't you just focus on your courses, just be happy instead? Why are you trying to take on this game, this battle, or why are you on this crusade? So those have been the other ones. And so others said, I agree with you, but, I'm just going to focus on my research and teaching, and then I can go home and spend time with my family. And at the end of the day, that's what makes me happy. Whereas if I do that, I'm just going to be miserable.
Right. Let's bring in, as a Jewish person, it's okay. I can bring in a Nazi reference. I have clearance for that because my identity allows me to do that. This is like arguing, you know what? I'm a butcher in Dusseldorf, and I just want to go about my business. So if there is a bunch of people called Jews being whisked away on the trains to one of the concentration camps, why should I get involved? Yes, it is stretching the analogy in that exterminating Jews is not the same thing as some idiots on university campuses playing the social justice warrior game. But the idea that you should be a bystander as you watch some injustice is grotesque. That's exactly what it is to not be a moral person, right? And so to those people who are telling you this, let them know that the Godfather thinks that they are coward punks.
Yeah, I think of it as like the bystander effect, right? You see someone who's passed out in front of the subway station, instead of checking to see if they're okay, you just keep walking. So I think it's more in line like that. It's just classic bystander effect.
Well, it is, but part of that effect is driven by cowardice. If you intervening makes you have skin in the game, right? And so I'd rather avoid hearing the cries of the person drowning in the river, because that might force me to jump into the cold river, and therefore, oh gee, I never heard that they were screaming. Right? So that is cowardly. That's what differentiates courageous heroes from the mass of cowards. And by the way, I'm told the same thing that you were told, which is, you're already a very busy guy. You have a very productive research career. You've made your point. You've fought, you've contributed to the cause. Why don't you chill out? And once in a while I say, yeah, maybe I need to chill out. It will make me a bit less stressed. But then I can't, because as I've often said on this show, at the end of the night, when I put my head on my pillow, I need to feel whole. And what I mean by that is I've done whatever I could to at least make the world in whatever small way that I can better. And if I could have and don't, then I feel as though I can't go to sleep at night, and therefore I keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with me, it comes from my East Indian heritage. So we had, Gandhi, who fought, he played such a key role. I mean, I credit him for me being out here in rural Nova Scotia teaching psychology as opposed to living under British rule in India. So there's sort of that one hand. But on the other hand, when we had the separation of India and Pakistan, I had my grandfather who was murdered for the only reason was because he was a government employee. My grandmother ended up blaming my mother for that, and so that had huge consequences then for my mother, my brother, and me. So I'm not going to go into all those details and for the viewers, but key thing is it did have some serious implications. But when I look back on that chapter of history, I kind of agree with what the British had done, because the reason is the way the Muslims and Hindus, while they're under British rule, they had a reason to get along. And the British knew, I think, that if without the British presence there, that the two would have really started fighting, and it would have made the Middle East look like world peace in comparison with that many people concentrated in such a small area. And so when people talk about anti-colonialism, I really disagree. I think that they did have a much better knowledge of civilization, and I don't see that as being racist just because they happen to be white. So I think with both sides and how we actually look at that chapter of in Indian history, I mean, I think I really do think that the colonialists, so-called colonialists, were well-intentioned. Their approach might not have been the greatest, but I think they did have the best intentions in mind when they came into the new lands for many of them. And so I disagree with the assessment that they were evil, in quotes, just because that's because if they wanted to have genocide, they easily could have done that, right? So when they use of terms like genocide, I find that very offensive because it minimizes very serious suffering that has occurred historically.
Did you hear about the name of the scholar escapes me? There's a guy who wrote a paper which was accepted and published in a journal where he was arguing for here are some benefits that were reaped via colonialism, and then it caused such a stir that I think they were going to retract the paper. Are you familiar with that case?
Yeah, I think it was in September. I actually talked about it in my research methods class because I thought it was pertinent to a course on critical thinking in academia. So how is it that we publish papers? So if you disagree with it, why not just counter it with good arguments if you think that there were bad arguments? So academic mobbing is something that should not be happening. So that's what I said in my class, and I think that might explain, because it was about the Indigenous. So now a student afterwards, the course was over, has been quite vocal on Twitter about me being fired and how she felt uncomfortable in my class by virtue of her being Indigenous. But then I had another student who was in my class who's Indigenous who just sent me private messages saying, keep doing what you're doing. I'm a Cree descent. But we don't hear his voice, but we hear the other students quite vocally on Twitter about how I should be fired because I made her uncomfortable in my class.
It amazes me, this sort of victimology ethos. And let me restate this because I think it's a very powerful position to contextualize all that we're talking about. I'm Jewish. I escaped Lebanon specifically because I was Jewish. So in terms of the victimology score, I rank higher than almost anybody. And yet I support the right of Holocaust deniers to come on university campuses and state that the Holocaust never happened. So you can't get a position that is clearer about the need of freedom of speech. So there's nothing that is more offensive than a Jewish person hearing that the systematic movement that sought to eradicate every single person of my people, I'm still willing to allow someone who denies that historical reality that it occurred. And the way that my position, of course, is that it becomes a slippery slope. Where do we decide what's offensive, what's not, right? Well, the reality is, if you're a radical feminist and you criticize feminism, you're making me feel unsafe in the classroom. If you're a Muslim and you criticize tenets of Islamic doctrines, then you're making me feel uncomfortable because I'm Muslim. And on it goes. Yet when it comes, for example, to communism, if in an economics class you argued, here are some real world data that suggests that communist systems are bound to fail because they are inconsistent with human nature, nobody would bat an eye. So it's okay to criticize using critical thinking and data communism, but don't criticize other sacred cows. Don't criticize Islam. Don't criticize radical feminism. Don't criticize intersectionality. Until people truly internalize how dangerous that ethos is, we're going to have more Rick Metas around.
Yeah. Well, I guess the flip side to your argument, the reason why that online, why am I following Michael Thurlow? I know that causes a bit of a stir. Is the way I see it is, apart from allowing people to speak, you have the opportunity to counter them. The other opportunity is that you might even be able to win them over, because if you talk to them, they might even see you as a human being, and they might actually change their mind. And we see this happening just spontaneously, where members of the Westboro Baptist Church, which is, most people would agree it's a hate group, or even people who've spent their whole lives living as neo-Nazis. So they're in these moral voids, but then they suddenly develop a conscience and start to think, well, wait a minute. So if that's what can happen spontaneously, then imagine what you can do if you just have a heart-to-heart conversation, you just have a chat over a beer. You can work wonders just by having a lunch with one of these people that you supposedly despise, because if you start chatting and having a conversation, you can reach common ground, and maybe over time they'll come to see your point of view. And that's actually what, what's his name, the guy in the documentary. So I'm going to show that as one of my extra credit screenings for my intra-psych class. It's called Accidental Courtesy.
Move it the other way. Yes, this way, yes. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so he's a Black musician and speaker. And so he was interested in the question of, when it comes to these, the KKK, Ku Klux Klan members, he was interested in the question, why is it that you hate me when you don't even know me? And so over time, he just reached out to them, having conversations, and he said, it's really quite easy, because you strike a conversation, you're bound to find something within 5 minutes that you can agree on. So you do that, and over time they became friends. And then eventually 200 of these KKK members decided to give up their robes and say, we don't want to be members of this group anymore. So those are missed opportunities that completely go by the wayside then when you suppress different perspectives.
I think he was, because the case rings familiar to me. Was he covered on 60 Minutes maybe at some point? Was he on? Because I've seen that exact story. But anyways, yeah, that's a wonderful story. By the way, I've experienced it myself, this ability to take someone who hates you simply because of your identity, by virtue, of course, of being Jewish, having grown up in the Middle East. So I've told, I think maybe on one or two previous occasions, but it's worth repeating here. When I first went for my PhD at Cornell, I used to hang out with a bunch of Middle Eastern guys, I mean, none of whom were Jewish. And I was, friends with all of them. Some were Christian, some were Muslim. And at one point, one of the guys, we had gone out for coffee, and he said to me, Gad, I really like you. I said, okay, that's nice, but why do you say it as though you're surprised? He goes, well, I mean, you're Jewish, but you're not a Jew. I said, oh, no, I'm a Jew. What he meant was, because he's from Lebanon, he's Arabic, he hadn't met many Jews. Now, I'm Jewish, but also from Lebanon, therefore we're both Arabic and so on. I didn't fit his stereotype of the Jew, and therefore I got an exemption because I was a Jew, but somehow a different kind of Jew, a cool Jew, an Arab Jew, and so on. But that is exactly what you spoke about, right? We connected, we saw our respective humanities. Well, I didn't need to see his humanity because I hadn't dehumanized him. I saw him as a whole person. But perhaps he didn't originally start with the same presumption regarding my humanity. And then I think we eventually were able to become friends. So I think you're exactly right. You don't shut down speech, you engage people. I've even had someone write to me privately on my public Facebook page where he started off with some really, really violent sort of anti-Semitic thing. You know, you Jew, I should squash you like the little cockroach. I actually engaged him and we went back and forth. And just with that engagement, which probably took about an hour, he was a completely different person.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's lots of opportunities. And in terms of where we are with the human condition, I think we're actually quite close to solving some of the big problems within psychology and within our society, that we can actually move on and actually look forward to a world of automation. So with automation on its way anyway, I think there's opportunities now to restructure our economy so that mothers can spend more time with their children. We can have, a smaller workforce that's just more productive. And so kind of keep the best of the old traditions with a modern context. So basically stay within our biological drives, because we know that, of course, moms want to spend time with their kids.
Oh boy, all the hate speech. First of all, you use the word mother. That's extremely offensive. There is no such thing. Don't succumb to fixed binaries and biological essentialism. There is no mother. There is no father. There's simply non-arboreal, carbon-based caretakers. Don't be a bigot, man. The Canadian Senate taught me that. There is no such thing as motherhood.
Yeah.
That left you speechless. Okay, so...
Yeah. Because my idea is what I said in one of the radio interviews was, instead of paying for this public childcare, which people I think would rather just spend time with their kids in the first place, why don't we instead let the mother or father, whoever it is, want to spend time with their kids, just make it open to whoever. But I think we'd expect more mothers would take advantage of that program than fathers. So they spend as much time with their kids as they like, but we then have some kind of a program so that we can quickly reintegrate them into the workforce. So it takes, you take a 1 year of college or something, then you're back working and you can pick up your game. So that's the approach that I would take. And at least, maybe it's a stupid idea, I have no idea one way or the other, but let's at least talk about it.
Right.
And maybe that might be a better way of doing things. And we'd have an automated economy where people can spend time with the leisure, do the things they actually want, and actually be more productive. And it's like, the way I see it, that's the best of all worlds. And that's something we can only do in a capitalist economy.
Right. So where are you now with, your university troubles? I mean, what's next? What's happening?
Well, I just got an email this morning. So it arrived at 8:19 a.m. So here it says, so as you know, Dr. McKay is conducting the investigation. So with all this in mind, basically, the gist of it, he wants to meet with me on either March 27th or March 29th at 1:30 p.m. So that's where the things stand over there. I'm going to a free speech panel at McMaster on March 29th, so that limits me to the 27th. So I'm going to agree, but I know nothing about the scope, what he's going to ask me about, what are my legal rights. So I think I'm going to look into getting some kind of, at least a law. If I can get an employment lawyer, that'd be even better. But just having a lawyer present there and ask if that's
and a good tape recorder to pursue the Lindsay Shepherd strategy.
Yeah, unless they say you're not allowed to and they pick my pockets or something like that. Right. So I'm not sure.
Yes, because we wouldn't want to have it on record how we're going to carry a kangaroo court proceedings on you, right? That would make us look bad. So what would be, let's look at what would be the best case scenario and the worst case scenario if we were to just brainstorm. How do you foresee the two continuums playing out?
Best case scenario, I think, would be some kind of warning letter that goes into my employee file. I think the worst case scenario would be outright dismissal.
And dismissal because what? You created an environment that is unsafe to people and they feel scared and they need to go into their safe space. And with that, is there some provision within your, sort of the faculty union guidebook or whatever it's called that says that would be ground for dismissal?
Hard to say. I think what I find interesting from the grievance committee was they were adamant about me not talking to the media, not posting anything on social media or anything like that.
Speaking on the show is not the way to go.
Yeah, because they said it would be it would hurt my chances if things went to arbitration. And so then when I did go public, and so my response to one of the emails I just said is we're a publicly funded institution, so therefore we need to be accountable to the general public, and those things. What I'm saying is stands, and I'm just saying all I'm going to do is present evidence and let people judge for themselves. And so then the response I got back was with big bold letters and all caps at the beginning, no, you must not. So there is something about that response that does not seem right.
Wow.
Just given I'm I'm a professor of psychology, my job is just to take a step back, neutrally observe behavior and report what I see. And so I do not see that as being a rational response in my capacity as a judgment and decision-making researcher.
Speaking of which, I just remembered we were talking just a minute ago about recording. Now, another issue that came up, and I saw it on your Twitter feed, I think, there was a discussion of whether you were in the right to ever tape any of the conversations within your classroom. Do you want to tell us whether that is part of the sort of the pursuit against you?
Yes, because I have received letters from my designated head to remove my recordings. So the reason he said was that the students would have assumed, it was based on their assumption of consent. So based on what they might have assumed, that's his rationale for taking it down. And then it's been that someone did a transcript of one of the classes, and so that could be construed as being against as harassment and discrimination. And so for those bases, he's demanding requesting that I take it down.
Wow. Well, best of luck to you. This was my small effort to at least offer you some forum to air out your positions. The people can decide for themselves whether you are the Dr. Mengele of the Maritimes or not. Best of luck. Keep us posted. Of course, we'll be following your case very closely because you're one of many instantiations of the slow erosion of freedom of speech on Canadian campuses. Cheers to you, and thank you for having the courage to stand up for your principles, Rick.
No, thank you, and I guess I'll say thank you and many of the others who inspired me. I think the only reason I'm here today is that I'm on the shoulders of giants, and so that definitely includes you.
Thank you.
But also, Janice Fiamengo, David Haskell from Wilfrid Laurier, Jordan Peterson. So those are, I guess, some of the big names. But then there are some of the people who don't have the public profiles. I think Paul Quirk at the University of British Columbia. So there's some who are sort of working on the ground who don't have the public profile. Mark Mercer at St. Mary's University. So there's so many others there. So if it wasn't for them having paved the way, I would not be here today. So I definitely do need to give credit where due. And that's from, a small list. There's so many that I've overlooked. So it's not an intentional slight. There's just so many that I need to thank. So
thank you for that collective shout out. By the way, will you be at the SAF's conference in May at Western University?
No, I wouldn't miss that for the world. This is going to be such a wonderful opportunity to see all these people who inspired me in the same room as me.
Do you know who's giving the plenary address at that conference?
Oh, yeah.
I look forward to seeing you there in person. Stay on the line, Rick. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, take care.
Cheers.